Welcome to Medieval History Channel 97, where the echoes of the past come alive. Step into the world of knights, castles, and forgotten legends as we journey through time together. Let history speak. Hey friends, tonight we're stepping into something raw, something vast, and something utterly merciless. This is life in the Roman Empire, not the gilded life of an emperor, not the polished world of marble villas, togas, and golden wreaths. Tonight you're not Caesar, you're just you. Dropped, unarmed and unready, into a world of stones, stoned, sandals, and the scent of blood lingering in the streets. No glory, no grandeur, just survival. But before we plunge into this gritty descent, take a breath. If you enjoy journeys like this, where history gets personal, not polished, feel free to like the video and subscribe. Drop a comment below with where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. It always amazes me to see the global thread that connects us across time zones. Now, dim the lights. Maybe let a fan hum in the background. Close your eyes for a second and fall backwards. Backwards into another time. Backwards into the belly of empire. Backwards into a life not your own. You wake to chaos, not the gentle ring of an alarm clock, but the sharp voices of merchants outside your wall. Chickens squawking. A baby wailing somewhere down the hallway. Your eyes open to a dim, cramped space, and the realization hits. You've woken up in a Roman insula, a cheap apartment block in the teeming heart of the city. 4, maybe 5 stories high, each floor more dangerous than the last. You're probably on the 3rd or 4th, not because you like the view, but because poverty doesn't give you a choice. Here, the higher you live, the closer you are to collapse, literally. All it takes is one clumsy neighbor spilling oil above you and your ceiling might come down in the night. The air is thick, stagnant. There's no glass window, just a crude hole in the wall that coughs in smoke, dust, and the occasional lost pigeon. Your room is barely larger than a closet, stone walls that sweat with mildew in the summer and trap every bit of cold in the winter. There's no bed, just a lumpy sack of straw that creaks with every move, crawling with lice. Your blanket? Damp. Wool. It smells like unwashed regret. You look around, there's no furniture, no candle, no symbols of who you are or what you dream of. Just a single clay cup, a worn, threadbare tunic. And if you're lucky, just maybe, a wooden comb to scratch the itch of civilization. There's no kitchen. Cooking inside is banned. One ember could turn this whole block into a firestorm. And Rome doesn't do fire safety. If it burns, it burns. There's no toilet either. Not in your room, not in your building. Just a chamber pot in the corner, half full, half forgotten. Its silence louder than any shame. And this is just the morning. You clutch the chamber pot like it's a sacred offering, carefully descending the crooked, moaning stairs. Each step a prayer not to slip, not to fall, not to become part of the morning mess already running down the gutter outside. The walls around you whisper with life, too much life. Every sound bleeds through them like water through cloth. You hear your neighbor muttering a prayer, then a cough, then a full-throated argument with his wife, followed by something else entirely, something that makes you wish you could unhear. The air wraps around you, thick, stale, metallic. It stinks of smoke, mildew, and the aching truth of unwashed bodies packed too closely together. Someone downstairs is already baking bread, and for a fleeting second, the scent tricks your stomach into hope. But it's not for you. Nothing down there is. Outside, voices rise with the sun. Vendors shout over one another. Figs, lentils, and fish guts offered like gold. Somewhere in the distance, a centurion's bark slices through the noise. Someone's getting beaten, or about to be, and no one looks twice. You haven't even stepped into the street, and already you're sweating, scratching, and probably breathing in lead dust from pipes older than your name. Welcome to the Roman workday. You're not a senator, not a gladiator, not even a servant in a noble house. You're just another weary body in a collapsing tenement, doing your best not to tumble down the stairs or offend some forgotten household god before noon. And the day hasn't even begun. Now that you've survived the stairs, the next urgent matter calls from deep within. Your bladder. There's no luxury of plumbing where you live, not even a bucket with dignity. So you do what everyone does. You shuffle into the street, chamber pot in one hand, shame in the other, headed toward the nearest latrina, Rome's generous term for a public toilet. But calling it public is almost kind. It's more like a communal theater of embarrassment, a space where strangers gather not only to relieve themselves, but to do so together, eye to eye, soul to soul. You arrive. A long, cold stone bench awaits, its surface punctured by evenly spaced holes. Beneath it, a shallow stream trickles, not fast enough to wash away the daily disgrace. You hover, then sit. Maybe, if you're feeling brave. Conversations flow faster than the water. Grain prices, politics, hemorrhoids. A retired soldier recounts the siege of some distant land while squatting. Across from you, a man chews olives with a dead stare. He never looks away. And then, the tersorium, a communal sponge on a stick, dipped in a bucket of vinegar. In theory, it's cleaned between uses. In practice, you'd rather not dwell. The sponge is worn, frayed. It's witnessed things no sponge should. You wipe cautiously. You pray the vinegar did something. If you're lucky, maybe you brought your own cloth. If you're wealthy, moss. But most days, you're not lucky, and certainly not wealthy. So you do what everyone else does, and carry the quiet humiliation with you, like another layer of skin. You think about skipping this nightmare next time, maybe finding an alley, but that would cost you. Roman law is clear, fines for public urination, and the guards, they don't do warnings. They do beatings. When it's all over, you reach to wash your hands, but of course there's no soap, no clean water, just a basin used by hundreds before you. You rinse and pretend it helps, and then you step back out. Lighter, yes, but also a little more hollow. That's Rome. And now, breakfast, if you can call it that. So you've survived the morning, managed to relieve yourself without falling into an open sewer or being carted off by the vigilance. Congratulations. Small victories count. Now comes breakfast, the so-called most important meal of the day. But in Rome, it's more like a shrug before the real suffering begins. Welcome to the Iron Taculum, a Roman morning ritual that's less about nourishment and more about endurance. 2 core ingredients, stale bread and watered-down wine. If fortune smiles, there might be cheese or olives, but mostly, there's just the dull ache of unmet expectations. Forget coffee. The Romans never even dreamed of it. No eggs, no bacon, no syrup-drenched comforts, and absolutely no oat milk latte to remind you that you're loved. This isn't about pleasure. Breakfast in Rome is about not starving to death before lunch. The bread, it's likely panis rusticus, rustic in the cruelest sense, a dense, grainy brick of yesterday's flour and today's disappointment. Chewy enough to test the strength of your jaw, dry enough to scratch the back of your throat. It doesn't crumble, it resists. The wine, thin and uninspiring, diluted on purpose, because even ancient Rome frowned upon being fully drunk at sunrise, unless of course you were a senator. And since Roman apartments didn't come with kitchens, you're not sitting down to eat. You're squatting on a street corner or loitering beside a fountain, surrounded by equally weary souls gnawing on their crusts like squirrels who've seen too much. Maybe, just maybe, you have a bit of oil or a drop of garum, that famously vile fermented fish sauce. If so, you've managed to season your despair with something that smells like regret and low tide. And if you're rich, you might get fruit, maybe a drizzle of honey. But you're not. You're one of the many too poor to indulge, too proud to beg, too tired to complain. You're just wealthy enough to not be chained and just poor enough to hate the guy next door with the chipped clay cup of goat milk. Sometimes vendors pass by, trays filled with hot chickpea fritters or sweet honeyed cakes, and for a fleeting moment, hope flickers. But your coin pouch is emptier than a gladiator's conscience, and hope doesn't buy fritters, so you chew your bread and pretend it's something else. Something tender, something kind, something that doesn't remind you how long the day ahead truly is. Because this is how it starts, with dry carbs, mild dehydration, and the creeping realization that you're about to walk 7 miles in sandals that feel like punishment, fueled only by the ghost of a meal and the fumes of last night's wine. And it doesn't get better, because now it's time to work. Your Roman workday awaits, a long grinding stretch of sweat and sore joints. Unless you're a senator, a poet with a patron, or somehow lucked into inheritance after a cousin fell off a cliff, you're working hard. You might be lifting bricks, hauling amphorae, scrubbing latrines, or if the gods truly hate you, crawling through the sewers of a city built on filth and ambition. Rome is grand, yes, but only because people like you built it, with your back, your blood, and a half-rotted rope as a belt. And the sun? It's just climbing the sky, burning down like it has something to prove. The foreman is already up, already barking orders, already swinging a stick like a conductor of misery. And you're already thinking about lunch, even though you know it won't be much better. If you're late, you lose a day's pay, if you're lucky. If not, you're beaten, humiliated, or simply cast aside. And in Rome, being cast aside doesn't mean a quiet retirement. It means starving, with the bitter dignity of someone who knows their suffering won't even be remembered. Your tools, they're crude extensions of your will to survive. A shovel held together by splinters and stubbornness. Bricks, strapped to your spine like burdens of fate. Water hauled from a cistern that reeks of mildew and long-forgotten hope. There are no gloves to soften the pain. No helmets to guard your skull from falling stones. Just the raw touch of sun-baked dust on skin, the sting of sweat in your eyes, and the constant awareness that one wrong step could end both your back and your future. And if you're a craftsman, you don't have it much better. You're drowning in a sea of sameness, clay pots, sandals, tunics, all competing for the same few coins. The work of your hands means nothing if someone wealthier decides they don't like your accent, your posture, your face. Even those with better jobs, the messengers, the scribes, the teachers, are just ghosts in Rome's machine. You're sprinting across cracked stones with scrolls no one will read. You're writing numbers for men who won't remember your name. Or you're trying to teach Latin to the pampered sons of senators who already think they sit among gods. And the women, they carry more than anyone notices. Spinning thread while nursing infants, weaving cloth while managing the market stall, raising children, keeping the fire lit, praying they survive childbirth, holding entire households together with hands no one thanks. And after all that, maybe you get a break. Maybe. A crust of bread, a stolen breath of shade, unless your supervisor is in a foul mood or performing his masculinity for a visiting prefect. Yes, you work, or you wither. Rome may be eternal, but your back, your breath, your body is not. If you've made it to midday without fainting, bleeding, or being whipped, congratulations. Now you face the city itself, Rome, in all her unfiltered chaos. The streets breathe, not metaphorically, literally, with rats, flies, mangy dogs, chickens, cattle, children darting between feet, thieves moving like smoke, beggars crying in accents from every corner of the empire. It's Times Square. If Times Square were soaked in piss and everyone carried a goat. The roads themselves are masterpieces of engineering and madness. Straight as a god's commandment, paved with stone, but slick with spilled wine, piss, vomit, and yesterday's garum sauce. Step off the raised footpath without watching and you'll feel it, warm, wet, unholy, seeping into your sandal. An unspoken baptism into the daily misery of the masses. Carts and wagons thunder by without warning. There are no lanes, no limits, no mercy. Daytime bans mean traffic barrels through at night, drivers blind in the dark, racing like possessed charioteers chasing a deadline. If the wheels don't crush you, someone's elbow will, or a vendor's basket, or the sharp tongue of a fishmonger shouting about spoiled eels and stolen change. This is Rome, the center of the world, and you are just trying to survive it. Then there's the air, not the kind that refreshes, but the kind that clings to your skin like a second, smokier coat. It's thick with the smoke of 1,000 cooking fires, the pungent perfume of temple incense, and the acrid stench of public latrines that ride the wind like an uninvited whisper. And sometimes, death. A dead dog, a decaying rat, maybe even worse. No one rushes to clean it. If an animal drops in the forum, the most it might get is a casual cloth draped over it, and the world moves on. This is Rome. Glorious, grand, and grotesquely alive. The streets don't just hum with life, they roar. Public spectacles erupt without warning. One moment you're walking, the next you're caught in a spontaneous brawl, a protest sparked by bread prices, or worse, a politician's parade clogging the road for hours as trumpet players blare out of tune fanfare directly into your soul. In Rome, the street isn't just a place, it's a force, and it has no mercy. One slip on a rotten fig, one encounter with a runaway ox cart, or one ill-timed glance at a patrician's pet monkey, and your day could spiral faster than Caesar's fate on the Ides of March. And all you wanted were some lentils. You're sweaty, dusty, overwhelmed, craving nothing more than a drop of cold water. And yes, you're in Rome, the city of aqueducts, where water flows from distant hills in majestic stone channels. A triumph of engineering, yes, but not exactly designed for you. Unless you're rich, of course, living in a domus with your own private fountain singing you lullabies of privilege. For the rest, you're sharing water with thousands of neighbors, coughing, sneezing, scratching, rarely washing Romans. The public fountains are communal chaos, used for drinking, foot washing, and sometimes dunking a screaming child in a ritual that dances the line between hygiene and desperation. You want to feel clean? Head to the therma, the Roman public baths. They're everywhere. They're beloved. They're a cornerstone of civilization. But also they're unsettling. You soak not in solitude, but in a lukewarm broth of strangers, naked strangers. The water is recycled from pool to pool with no soap, no chlorine, and absolutely no personal space. A man might lecture you about politics while scratching his belly. Another might offer to sell you socks as he scrapes earwax with a stick. It's loud, it's raw, it's Rome, and the water, it's been through everyone. You're not bathing, you're marinating in the collective essence of the empire, with a faint scent of eucalyptus if you're lucky. And speaking of water, the same miraculous aqueducts, lined with lead pipes. Yes, lead, because the Romans conquered the world with their roads and plumbing. But chemistry, not so much. So over time, that cool, flowing miracle turns into a slow poison, anemia, gout, infertility, even madness. A high price for indoor plumbing. Want to drink something safer? Wine. Seriously, water is suspect, especially in the poorer districts where it mixes freely with sewage and street runoff. Wine, diluted and shared among men, women, and children, becomes not a luxury, but a lifeline. Because in a crumbling empire, a gentle, day-long buzz might be your most reliable escape. Yes, Rome brought water to its people long before the world knew how. But for the average Roman, every sip, every rinse, every bath was a gamble. A dance with disease, decay, and the limits of human tolerance. Admire the aqueducts, celebrate the baths. But trust them? Not for a second. Welcome to the Roman Empire, where pain isn't a fleeting inconvenience, but the ever-present hum beneath every breath you take. It's not just a possibility, it's your constant companion, your shadow, the drumbeat of existence. You stub your toe, there's no ice, no ibuprofen, no gentle hands to console you. Just the raw shock of pain and the silent understanding that you have no choice but to keep walking until it either heals wrong or you lose it altogether. Break a bone? You don't get a cast or clean bandages. You wrap it in whatever cloth you can find, already stiff with old blood, and pray that the fever doesn't follow. Even breathing feels like a betrayal when every rib screams in protest. Get a splinter? It's not small. It's not funny. It's potentially fatal. That tiny sliver of wood might bloom into an infection that creeps up your arm and steals your life in the night. And there's nothing. No antiseptics, no doctor waiting with sterile tools. Just the creeping dread and the hope that your body knows how to fight. Comfort is a foreign language in Roman life. There are no soft chairs, no padded shoes, no notion that the body deserves rest. Laborers haul stones while hernias swell inside them like curses. Soldiers march 20 miles a day with blistered feet, their legs marked by scorpion stings and unspoken pain. Women in childbirth face the agony of creation alone. No epidurals, just chance and courage, and sometimes not even that. Every part of you is one misstep away from becoming a wound, a scar, or a memory someone else will try not to repeat. And help? That's a luxury. Maybe there's a temple nearby. Maybe a priest knows the right herb, the right prayer, the right spell, or maybe you're left with what most Romans had: smoke, superstition, and silence. And if those fail, you wait. You endure. You vanish. Anesthesia doesn't exist. Surgery is an act of desperation. You scream into a block of wood while a man carves your flesh, not to heal you, but to buy you time. A dislocated shoulder is yanked back into place by Marcus, who's not a doctor, but he once watched someone try. If you need dental work, imagine a blacksmith with iron tools and no remorse. Now imagine him in your mouth. That's the image. And if you're poor, or worse, enslaved, your pain isn't even considered real. You bleed, you cry, you collapse, and all the world gives you is a warning not to stain the mosaic floor. Your suffering is invisible, inconvenient, disposable. Even among the wealthy, pain isn't something to soothe, it's something to survive. Stoicism reigns. To suffer silently is to be noble. To complain is to be weak. A broken limb isn't a tragedy, it's a test. And if you weep, you fail. Real Romans bleed quietly, they grieve inwardly. And later, if they're lucky, they write poetry about it. So yes, pain is always waiting. It strikes without warning, it stays without pity, and it leaves no space for comfort, only endurance. With that grim reality in mind, let's explore what it means to actually visit a Roman doctor. You're hurt. Maybe it's yesterday's blister now purple and oozing, or maybe your face is sliced to ribbons after trying to shave with a dull bronze blade. Either way, you need help. But in Rome, medical attention doesn't mean healing. It means surviving whatever the doctor decides to do to you. Let's start with the basics. Roman medicine is a volatile brew of Greek theory and mystical improvisation. Part philosophy, part guesswork, all pain. And believe it or not, many truly believed in it. At the heart of ancient medicine was a strange conviction. The body was governed by four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. If you felt off, it wasn't your mood, your stress, or your diet, it was imbalance. And the cure? Simple. Drain something. So your doctor, who might also double as your barber, would confidently reach for a knife or a jar of leeches, no hesitation. Because back then, bloodletting wasn't last resort. It was the treatment for headaches, heartbreaks, fevers, fatigue, even for sins. Coughing? Open a vein. Feeling low? Let's bleed out your sorrow. And surgery? Oh yes, it existed. Roman surgeons wielded scalpels, forceps, and bone drills with chilling familiarity. But what they didn't have was mercy in the form of anesthesia. You stayed conscious, every breath a prayer, every second a scream held behind clenched teeth, while a man in a stained toga dug into your body with the confidence of someone who once skimmed a scroll. Antiseptics? A myth. If you were lucky, they'd pour wine or vinegar into the wound, which might kill bacteria, yes, but also seared through your nerves like the wrath of forgotten gods. Infection? Expected. Death? Frequently scheduled. And if you survived the knife, you'd be handed a prescription that ranged from honey and garlic to crushed beetles' ashes, or a paste made of herbs and holy animal dung. And when all else failed, they'd send you to sleep in a temple, whisper prayers to Asclepius, and hope your dreams would deliver divine instructions for healing. But if healing didn't come, the doctor would shrug. Your family would light a candle, and your neighbors would already be whispering, wondering what omen your death might bring. It wasn't that the Romans didn't care. They did. They just hadn't quite figured out what healed you and what killed you a little faster. So the next time you sneeze, whisper a quiet thank you to the universe for antibiotics, for anesthesia, for the fact that medicine no longer begins with a blade. And after a long day of sweating, bleeding, and dodging carts in ancient Rome, you're starving. It's time for dinner, or cena, as they called it. Just don't expect anything warm, soft, or comforting. This is survival, not luxury. Let's begin with what isn't on the table. No pizza, no pasta, no tomatoes, no potatoes, no chocolate, no sugar, and absolutely no coffee. None of it had been discovered. None of it had arrived. None of it had touched the tongue of ancient Rome. This isn't your romanticized Italian feast. This is pre-Italy survival. This is grit disguised as a meal. You sit down, not at a candlelit table, but before a rough wooden bowl filled with something brown, steaming faintly, and entirely uninspiring. It's probably pulse, a porridge of spelt, lentils, or beans. It tastes like damp gravel laced with a whisper of herb if fortune favors you. If not, then it's just damp gravel. Unapologetic and bland. Protein? A rare luxury. If you didn't catch it, trap it, or fish it yourself, you probably didn't get any. Meat was not for the common soul. And even when you did get some, it came with an edge of uncertainty. Too salty, too smoked, too fermented, too old. There were no refrigerators. Preservation was a desperate art. Heavy salting, laborious smoking, or bathing in garum, the fermented fish sauce that smells like sorrow from the sea. It doesn't just offend your nose, it clings to your spirit. On better days, you might find boiled vegetables, a chunk of hard cheese, or a wrinkled fig. The wealthy dined on flamingos and stuffed dormice, jellyfish steeped in vinegar, a menu more about spectacle than sustenance. These dishes weren't made to nourish, they were made to astonish, to declare power, to flaunt the freedom to eat things no sane palate would crave. And the wine, always diluted. Drinking it pure was for barbarians, but the water it was mixed with? Questionable. You don't get to choose safety, only the speed of your suffering. Dessert, if it exists, is humble. Dried fruit, a handful of nuts. But more often, you're fasting. Not by choice, but by ritual. A feast day to honor a god who sneers at indulgence. So no tiramisu, no soft ending. Just restraint and maybe a pang of hunger masked as reverence. Napkins, don't bother looking. You wipe your hands on a shared cloth, stained and traveled, or on your tunic, which now carries the ghosts of your meal. Cleanliness is aspirational. By the end, you are fed, but not quite fulfilled. Your stomach is full, yes, but unease stirs beneath the surface. Your breath smells of garlic, cheap wine, and something harder to name, a trace of quiet despair. But you survive. You always survive. And now, you brace for the Roman night. Because leisure in the city doesn't come gently. There are no soft lights or calming walks. The air hums with tension, and the streets breathe danger. You've labored all day. You're caked in grime, wearied by work, and haunted by the scent of fish sauce that won't leave your fingers. You long for distraction, for something to dull the edges of your reality. Well, Rome provides. Entertainment is everywhere, but beauty is rare. The Colosseum, massive, magnificent, merciless, the crown of Roman spectacle and the grave of compassion. You join the crowd not because you want to, but because everyone does. You watch men bleed for amusement. You see wild beasts tear through the condemned. And if the emperor is feeling theatrical, the arena floods with water, and real ships, real sailors, and real drowning reenact naval battles for the sake of glory. This is not leisure. This is ritualized brutality, a city feeding its soul with violence, a people trying to feel alive by watching others die. Welcome to ancient Rome, where survival isn't just about what's on your plate, it's about what you can endure, what you can witness, and what you can stomach, day after day, with no relief but the numbness you learn to wear like armor. It's free to attend, how generous, right? Until you realize it's free, because the state would rather keep you entertained than informed, distracted, while senators quietly raise taxes and redraw the borders of someone else's homeland. You find yourself crammed between strangers, slick with sweat, the air thick with the scent of blood and dust. The crowd erupts. A gladiator just lost a limb. You clap. You're not sure why. Maybe because everyone else is. Maybe because it's easier than thinking. If you wince at the sight of gore, there's always the theater. The amphitheater offers something classier, a Latin tragedy you barely understand, or a slapstick farce where the big joke is someone pretending to violate Jupiter with a sausage. Subtlety? Not exactly Rome's specialty. Craving adrenaline? Head to the Circus Maximus. Chariots roar past at breakneck speed. No helmets, no barriers, just flesh, wood, and the inevitability of splintering bone. Crashes are common. Death is entertainment. The crowd is here for the chaos, for the gamble. Cheer for the wrong team, and you might not make it home in one piece. And in the streets, a different kind of theater. Fire breathers, acrobats, pickpockets, street philosophers with sunburned skin and wild eyes who yell at clouds and emperors alike. Don't like what you're seeing? Wait 5 minutes. Something louder will come along. But beneath all this, the noise, the color, the spectacle, there's something darker pulsing through the city's veins. Rome wasn't just distracting its people, it was enchanting them. It wrapped brutality in pageantry and called it culture. This wasn't entertainment, it was anesthesia. And if your soul still stings after all that, there's always more wine. Now, let's talk about Roman justice. Spoiler alert, it's not here to make you feel safe. You've made it through your day, your work, your meal, the sight of a man dying to applause, and maybe, just maybe, you think you're in the clear. That if you follow the rules, the law will stand between you and danger. That's cute. In Rome, the law doesn't protect, it reminds. It reminds you that you are small, that you can be replaced, that mercy is something reserved not for people, but for marble statues of emperors who never bleed. Are you a citizen? Then you have rights, at least on paper. You won't be whipped in public unless someone with power is in a particularly foul mood. You'll get a trial, eventually. Maybe. Are you not a citizen? Then justice is faster, cruder, a beating, a brand, an execution at the edge of the city where the road turns red. And slaves, they aren't people, they're things. Things that feel pain, things that scream, things that no one listens to. If a slave dares to murder their master, even if the master was cruel, twisted, and fully deserving, the response is swift, merciless, and symbolic. Every slave in that household might be executed. Not for justice, for the message. Don't even think about it. And if you're accused of a crime, don't expect fairness. Don't expect compassion. There's no quiet room, no thoughtful lawyer sliding notes across a desk. Trials are theater, brutal public theater. The rich show up with an entourage, witnesses, bribes, and well-rehearsed outrage. You show up with your tunic clinging to nervous sweat and a stomach full of dread. If you can cry on cue, use it. If not, start praying. To Jupiter, to Fortuna, to anyone who might be listening, and hope the magistrate isn't nursing a hangover. Punishment isn't just about pain, it's about fear. Thieves don't just lose possessions, they might lose their hands. Liars can have their tongues split open. Fraud? You're lucky if it's just flogging. And if your words touch the emperor's pride, that's not jail time. That's execution, creative, often theatrical, and never quick. Some punishments are crafted for crowds, for cheers and jeers, not redemption. Crucifixion is a favorite, long, slow, meant to strip a human down to nothing but pain and shame. It wasn't just for Jesus, it was Rome's masterpiece of warning. Rebels, thieves, anyone they wanted to erase, nailed to wood, left for the flies and the spectacle. And don't go looking for protection. The vigils, Rome's so-called police, are tired, underpaid, and dangerously pliable. Get mugged, and they may walk the other way. Pay them, and they might walk with you, right into someone else's home. Justice is not their mission. Order is, and order has a price. Rome has laws, carved in stone, preached in forums, but those laws kneel to power, not principle. They keep the hierarchy intact. They keep the powerful sleeping soundly at night, and when you've survived the chaos, the cruelty, and the courtroom circuses, you might crave something softer. Spiritual peace, divine comfort, a God who sees your pain. But this is Rome, and in Rome the gods aren't here to comfort you. They're watching, they're judging, and you're not just living under human law, you're walking on sacred ground, ruled by Jupiter himself. So no, you don't get peace, you get survival. In the Roman Empire, religion isn't something you tuck away in your heart or whisper about behind closed doors. It's a living, breathing force, an ever-present cloud of incense, smoke, and obligation that wraps itself around every moment of your waking life. You don't get to choose your gods. They choose you. And there are so many gods. Gods for the tiniest things you never even thought to worry about. The creak of a door hinge, cardia, the foul flow of the sewers, cloacina, the invisible lines that mark property terminus, and even the creeping mold on your walls, robigus. Try walking 5 steps in any direction and you'll stumble into a shrine, a small altar, a flickering candle, the scent of burning oil. If you don't pause, bow, light your candle, mutter your prayer, if you don't do these things just right, you're not simply disrespectful, you're inviting disaster. Maybe not this hour, maybe not this week. But someday, when the roof caves in on your head or the harvest fails, your neighbors will whisper, "He skipped the Saturnalia offering." And the gods have remembered. The calendar is packed, dozens of festivals every year, each a commandment etched in fire and fear. On those days, the city grinds to a halt. Animals are dragged to altars and sacrificed while the streets reek of roasting bull and damp marble. You show up out of devotion? Yes, but also because you're terrified of the cost if you don't. Plagues could sweep through, droughts dry your wells, and the fields might fail, leaving you starving for lentils and hope. And then there's emperor worship, the state's grandest performance. You're not only expected to recognize your ruler, you're supposed to worship him like a god come to earth. Offer incense at his altar, sing his praises loud enough for the gods to hear. Never, ever roll your eyes during his triumphal procession. Because if you do, if you falter in this ritual, it's treason walking on the edge of a blade. Miss a public ceremony? Too quiet during the Vestalia? Fail to toss your grain into the sacred flame? You become a target. An impious outsider, an atheist, or worse, a suspicious soul whose loyalty is questioned. Suspicion in Rome isn't just dangerous, it's a predator lurking in shark-infested waters. If you follow a foreign cult, keep it hidden. Unless the gods you worship bring wine, taxes, or soldiers, the state wants nothing to do with you. Roman religion isn't about what you feel, it's about what you do. Perform perfectly, publicly, and on time. And for heaven's sake, smile while you sacrifice that goat. Now, let's talk about something even more relentless, the greasy, slippery ladder of Roman social ambition. You've bowed to the gods, you've dodged lawsuits, you've survived the communal baths without catching some mythical disease. But the hardest part is still ahead. Roman society is a machine, brutal, unforgiving, and precise. Every word you speak, every gesture you make, every sandal strap you fasten could tip the scales in your favor or break your neck. It's a ladder, but one coated in oil, lined with hidden daggers. At the very top sit the senators, old money aristocrats, draped in purple stripes, owning estates so vast they have their own postal codes. Just below them, the equestrians, wealthy merchants and businessmen who wield influence through coin and contract. Then come the plebeians, people like you. The struggling middle and lower classes, caught in the relentless grind of daily survival. Below you, the freedmen, the slaves, the foreigners trying to find a foothold, and that unlucky soul who once insulted a statue of Augustus by accident. Want to rise above the chaos? You'll need patrons. Powerful men who hold your fate in their hands, trading protection for your loyalty, errands, favors, and sometimes your vote. It's like having a boss, a godfather, and a landlord all wrapped up into one patronizing smile. Every morning, you join the queue outside your patron's grand home for the Solutia. You wait, shoulder to shoulder with others like you, offer compliments on his latest haircut, maybe praise his son's toga. Then, with all the humility you can muster, you ask for a favor. A coin, some food, or a nod of recommendation. If fortune smiles, he tosses a coin your way and lets you carry his litter through the bustling forum. Congratulations, you're now connected. But be warned, every move you make is under watchful eyes. Your clothes must be clean, not fashionable, just clean enough to avoid scorn. Your words must be measured, your companions carefully chosen, and above all, don't show ambition. That unsettles the powerful. Rise too fast, and jealous rivals will conspire to bring you down, socially, politically, or worse. In Rome, networking is a battlefield. Gossip is currency. A single careless word at a banquet can ruin you. Yet, the right marriage might save your family's entire legacy. Play your cards close. Love? That's for poets and fools. The rest of Rome marries for alliances, property, and survival. Even if you reach the pinnacle, don't get comfortable. One failed harvest, one forgotten ritual, one envious enemy, and everything crashes down. The dagger comes from the shadows, this silent and swift. Now the sun sinks behind the city rooftops, and you hope for a moment of peace. But Rome doesn't rest. Nightfall shifts the city's chaos from loud and restless to dark and deadly. There is no light unless you're wealthy enough to burn oil lamps all night, and few are. Most stumble through the maze of alleys guided only by moonlight, memory, and desperate hope. Trip and fall here, and don't expect help. They might even steal your shoes. The vigils, Rome's official night watchmen, are supposed to guard the streets, prevent fires, and stop crime. In reality, they're exhausted, poorly paid, and often more interested in sleep than duty. Some are brave, yes, but most are just trying to survive the night like the rest of us. Most are bribable, and all of them are outnumbered. Criminals know this. Thieves, muggers, and the occasional Bordex gladiator roam the shadows, hunting easy marks. If you're walking home alone, you are the easy mark. It doesn't matter who you are. Unless you're armed, fast, or invisible, you're at risk. And then there's fire, Rome's greatest nighttime terror. Insulae, those charming death trap apartments you call home, are made of wood. And dreams? Cooking after dark is illegal for this reason. But laws mean little to a hungry tenant. A single overturned lamp can reduce an entire block to ash in hours. The Great Fire of 64 CE didn't start itself, but once it did, it raged like Mars unleashed in fury. You might think your building is safe until the smell of smoke hits you at midnight and you realize there's no plan, no warning, no help coming. You grab your single tunic, your chamber pot, and maybe your dignity, and you sprint down a collapsing staircase, heart pounding, lungs burning. If it's not fire or thieves, it's noise. Drunken parties echo through the narrow streets. Processions for forgotten gods thunder past with drums and shouting. And if a senator's mistress is upset, everyone within 3 blocks knows about it by morning. Sleep in ancient Rome? A luxury. Silence? A myth. Safety? Reserved for the wealthy, the armed, and the extraordinarily lucky. But hey, morning's almost here. You just have to survive one more night, and then repeat. The sun sets on Rome, but don't expect calm. No quiet dinners, no gentle breezes, no peaceful sleep. Rome doesn't go silent at night. It shifts into something darker, louder, more dangerous. The city prowls while others rest. Let's start with fire. Roman buildings, especially the tall wooden insulae packed with the poor, are tinderboxes waiting for a careless spark to turn them to ash. There's no real fire department, says just the vigils, part firefighters, part night watch, part exhausted and underpaid janitors. They carry buckets and hope. If your home catches fire, you might be saved, or you might become tomorrow's cautionary tale. Then there are the thieves, cut purses and pickpockets who treat moonlight as their license to hunt. Rome's alleys are narrow, dark, and unforgiving. Torches cost money few have. If you must walk after dark, you do so by touch and instinct. Don't carry anything shiny. Don't make eye contact. And whatever you do, don't get caught between two drunken gladiators arguing over a missing sandal. Speaking of drunk, the city's nightlife is a relentless storm. Taverns overflow with sour wine, raucous laughter, and men shouting bad poetry about Mars and women they will never hold. Fights erupt like wildfire. Dice games end soaked in blood and shattered dreams. Sometimes a spiteful noble settles a grudge by sending a slave to beat a man senseless in the street. You hide in shadows, your heart pounding, pretending you didn't see a thing. If you're a woman walking alone after dark, good luck. Rome does not forgive or forget unchaperoned females. The streets belong to the desperate, the reckless, the dangerously bored. Trying to sleep, that's a battle of its own. Your insula groans under centuries of neglect, threatening collapse. Rats scurry unseen through the walls, whispering their hunger. Your neighbor coughs, a raw, ragged sound like a dying goat. Somewhere close, someone screams. Whether from lust, rage, or death, you can't tell. You press your face into a sweat-soaked pillow and whisper a prayer to Mercury for silence. But silence is a stranger in Rome. Not for you. In this city, even darkness roars. And when dawn breaks, the cycle begins again. You woke in a crumbling insula, survived the horrors of public toilets, chariot traffic, gladiator bloodshed, lead poisoning, leeches, endless religious festivals, burning rooftops, and half-cooked lentils swimming in fermented fish sauce. You bowed to gods you never understood, obeyed laws that offered no protection, and slept through riots, rats, and the occasional public execution. You are filthy, exhausted, possibly sick, and emotionally battered by the communal sponge. And this was just one day. Would you survive another? Honestly, no. Most of us, comforted by air conditioning, antibiotics, and instant delivery, would break by midday. You'd surrender long before the second round of garum. And yet, the Romans endured. For centuries. Because here's the maddening, magnificent truth. Amid all the filth, cruelty, and noise, Rome worked. They built cities, roads, aqueducts, libraries, temples, and amphitheaters that still inspire awe. They stretched their empire across continents. They enforced laws, advanced philosophy, mapped the heavens, performed surgeries, and invented concrete. Concrete that outlasts many modern structures. They created systems that shaped Europe and the world for 2 millennia. Latin became the root of countless languages. Their architecture shaped cathedrals, parliaments, and universities. Their political ideas, republics, senates, vetoes, still echo in today's democracies. But none of it came without a cost. For the average Roman, not the emperors, not the marble-bathed elite, daily life was a hard-fought grind. And yet they endured, they adapted. They didn't have a choice, because Rome wasn't made of gold. It was made of sweat, fear, and ambition, and survival layer by layer, person by person, century by bloody century. And that's why it lasted. You'd be begging to go back to modern plumbing and antihistamines by mid-afternoon. You'd trade your entire dinari pouch for a hot shower and a chair with a back on it, and that's okay. You don't need to survive ancient Rome. You just need to understand it, and maybe, just maybe, appreciate that someone, somewhere, once walked those same filthy streets and helped build the empire. So you could sit here today, clean, safe, and mildly horrified. Imagine being a Parthian princess in the 2nd century BCE. You've got royal blood in your veins. A name fit for legend, Rhodogun. And more importantly, you live in a world where your family spends more time fighting rebels than hosting dinner parties. Rhodogun wasn't born into peace and pearls. She was born into grit, horses, and the constant possibility that someone might poison your dates. Her father, Mithridates Sect, was no idle king. He was the one who expanded Parthia from a dusty fringe kingdom into a formidable empire that would one day spar with Rome. But expansion comes with problems, namely rebellions, betrayals, and those neighbors who just won't accept that your army now owns their backyard. As a young woman, Rhodogun would have grown up watching envoys argue, commanders draw maps in the sand, and palace scribes try to keep track of who was loyal this week. She wasn't trained just in silk and ceremony. She learned statecraft, command presence, and how to wear armor that didn't clash with her earrings. It's important to understand the role of Parthian women here. While not always given the spotlight, Parthian noblewomen were no strangers to power. Some ruled cities, others plotted dynastic alliances, and a few, like Rhodagun, became legends not for who they married, but for who they defeated. And defeat she did, but that part comes later. At this point in her life, Rhodagun's name was already known. She was a symbol not just of royal lineage, but of Parthian pride. She carried with her the expectation that she'd either marry a king or become one in spirit. She didn't seem content with sitting on the sidelines while cities burned or provinces rebelled. While most royal ladies were being oiled and perfumed, Rhodagun was likely brushing up on military reports and court logistics. She had no time for vanity. And as fate would have it, she would one day make a vow not to wash her hair until a rebellion was crushed. Spoiler alert, it took a while. But before we get to that dusty crown moment, we need to understand what kind of rebellion dares to provoke a princess who would rather lead troops than wear gold. The Parthian Empire, grand as it appeared on a map, was more duct tape than marble. Stretching from the Persian Gulf to the edges of Mesopotamia and beyond, it was stitched together by marriages, oaths, and the occasional sword pressed firmly against someone's neck. So when a rebellion flared up in the western provinces, likely in Media or Babylonia, it wasn't exactly surprising. What was surprising was how bold the rebels were. These weren't just disgruntled tax evaders. These were full-blown aristocrats and city leaders, angry at the central power and perhaps emboldened by the young age or absence of a male royal enforcer. They didn't just throw a fit. They took fortresses, silenced Parthian envoys, and essentially told the crown to go polish its own sandals. Now, under ordinary circumstances, the king would have dispatched a general, or a cousin with too much ambition and too little brains. But these weren't ordinary circumstances, for reasons still debated by historians. Maybe timing, maybe logistics, maybe sheer royal defiance. Rhodagun herself took command, and not just in the abstract "I'll approve the battle plans" kind of way. No. She got on a horse, donned armor, and she made a public vow that would become the stuff of legend. She would not wash, comb, or otherwise tend to her hair until the rebellion was crushed. It was bold, it was dramatic. It was frankly a nightmare for court stylists. But that vow, dramatic as it sounds, wasn't about vanity. It was a declaration, a visual symbol that tied her personal dignity to the fate of the empire. Every time someone saw her tangled, dust-laden hair, they'd be reminded, this isn't over until we win. And that worked. Soldiers rallied. The troops didn't just see a princess. They saw a commander who was literally letting her beauty decay with the war. She embodied Parthian resilience, the kind that didn't rely on thrones, but on thorns, dust, and sweat. Meanwhile, the rebels probably didn't know whether to laugh or panic. They had expected a general, maybe a diplomat. Instead, they got a furious, unwashed woman riding straight for their gates with steel in her eyes and no time for conditioner. And worse, she meant business. When Rhodagun set out from the capital, she wasn't escorted by a lavish court parade or showered in rose petals. She was accompanied by cavalry, grit, and the weight of an empire that needed its rebels squashed like an overripe fig. And she looked the part. Gone were any signs of courtly delicacy. Her hair, famously unkempt, began to take on a life of its own, hanging like a banner of war-torn determination. In a world obsessed with appearances, she turned her own into a weapon. The campaign was not swift. This wasn't a single siege easily resolved with a bribe and a battering ram. The rebel cities were fortified and confident. They had expected hesitation from the central power, not a battle-hardened woman galloping through the dust with fire in her gaze. But Rhodagun didn't waver. Her military instincts were sharp, perhaps sharper than many of the men who had led before her. She employed classic Parthian strategies: mobility, feigned retreats, and hit-and-run raids. Her forces would appear at the edge of a rebel-held city, vanish like smoke, and return a day later from an unexpected flank. Reports suggest her soldiers admired her not just as a symbol, but as a tactician. She didn't ride behind the lines. She was up front, dirt under her nails and fury under her helmet. And as the weeks dragged on, so did her hair. It's said that by the third month, the strands had begun to knot into ropes, full of dust, sweat, and the whispers of battlefield prayers. But that only made her more terrifying to her enemies and more revered by her men. Rebels called her the Witch Queen, not because she practiced magic, but because no noblewoman should still be fighting in the field and refusing a bath. Surely, they reasoned, something unnatural was at work, but there was nothing magical about it, just sheer, unrelenting discipline. By the time her army laid siege to the final rebel holdout, the legend had already outpaced the rebellion itself. In every tavern, every tent, soldiers whispered and joked, this enemy wasn't afraid of Pathion's swords. No, what truly haunted them was the woman they called Rodigon, the one who hadn't washed in weeks, the one whose stench was as formidable as her blade. And to be honest, they weren't entirely wrong. The last bastion of resistance towered ahead, a fortified city whispered to be impenetrable, where rebel leaders clung like ticks, stubborn and unyielding. Supplies had been stockpiled, archers crowded the ramparts, and the gates were bolstered with that smug arrogance only traitors wield. They believed they could outlast Rodigon, a grave mistake. By now, her very presence was legend. Stories traveled far beyond the Empire's borders into enemy lands, spreading like wildfire. The woman who won't wash, they murmured, voices heavy with dread, she has come. Some said her hair had turned to iron. Others swore she hadn't slept for weeks. Tales piled up like siege ladders, tall, unsteady, threatening to collapse. But Rodigon was no myth. She was flesh and bone, and she commanded with ruthless intelligence. Rather than storming the gates in a frenzy, she chose a different path, a slow, merciless siege. She choked their trade routes, intercepted messengers, poisoned wells, turning patience into a weapon sharper than any sword. The rebels had prepared for battle, for blood and steel. Instead, starvation crept in, silent and suffocating. Time itself became Rodigon's ally, rotting their resolve from the inside out. Yet there she was, camping just beyond the city walls alongside her soldiers, one of them beneath the canvas tents. She ate their gritty bread, drank their lukewarm wine, inspected armor, led patrols, and still, despite every chance, she refused to touch a comb. For her army, that vow had become sacred. No one dared joke about it, not even in whispers. It embodied Pathian pride, a living symbol that their suffering was not in vain. Every tangled lock of her hair was a defiant reminder, we endure, we fight. Inside the rebel city, hope withered. They had intended to break the enemy by standing firm, but it was their own spirit that crumbled. Their commanders bickered, supplies dwindled. Rumors of desertion slithered like cracks in stone, until finally the breaking point came. A small gate, unguarded for but an hour, whether due to exhaustion or treachery, was discovered by one of Rodigon's scouts. Under cover of darkness and wind, her forces slipped inside, opening the main gates from within. By dawn, the city was hers, and there stood Rodigon, face streaked with sweat and ash, unwashed and unyielding, perched atop the battlements, terrifying in her raw, relentless victory. No trumpets sounded, no banners waved, victory was declared with water. After months of dust, battle, and relentless pursuit, Rodigon stood before her army. Not in royal robes, but in the same battlefield garb she had worn since the campaign began. Her armor bore dents from rebel blades, her face was lined from sun and strain, and her hair, her wild, matted, filthy hair, now hung down her back like a lion's mane made of wire and legend. But she had done it. Every rebel city had fallen. Every oathbreaker had been brought low. And now, with her vow complete, she could finally do what no one in the Empire had dared attempt to rush. She could wash her hair. According to tradition, and later accounts passed down through oral history, Rodigon summoned her servants not to a golden chamber, but to a public courtyard. She wanted her soldiers, the ones who bled beside her, to witness this moment. Basins were filled, oils were warmed, combs were retrieved from storage like sacred relics. And then, under the open sky, the warrior princess of Pathia, caked in the grime of war, began to scrub away months of rebellion. It was symbolic. Every tangle undone was another city reclaimed. Every rinse of water over her scalp washed away defiance, soaked into the earth, as if the land itself had been restored. Some say she wept, others say she laughed, but what no one disputed was the silence among the troops as they watched. Hardened men, scarred and sunburned, stood like statues as Rodigon emerged from her ritual. transformed. No crown was placed on her head. She didn't need one. The dust had become her diadem. The act of not washing had become more powerful than any jewel. And in that moment, Pathia didn't just have a princess. It had a symbol. She could have returned to court in triumph, let the scribes compose flattering odes, allowed nobles to fall over themselves in praise, but she didn't. She didn't rush back to luxury. She stayed with her troops a while longer. She dined with them. She listened to them. She knew that her legend had just begun, but she didn't want it forged in gold. She wanted it forged in memory. After the hair washing, that became an event for the ages. Radagon could have ridden straight to the capital with fanfare, banners, and enough propaganda to last a century, but she didn't. Instead, she took the long route back, deliberately visiting the cities she had reclaimed one by one, walking their streets, inspecting their defenses, ensuring no embers of rebellion still glowed beneath the ashes. This wasn't mere ceremony, it was strategy. Radagon knew the danger of victory, how quickly it can melt into complacency. Empires don't fall from defeat alone, they fall from forgetting why they fought in the first place. She wanted the rebels and loyalists alike to understand that Pathine's strength wasn't just cavalry and coin, it was embodied in her very presence. A woman who chose hardship over comfort and earned loyalty by example, not decree, and loyalty she received. Everywhere she went, people gathered, not to gawk at royalty, but to stare in awe at her. Not polished, not perfumed, but real. She didn't bring fear, she brought accountability. She asked for reports, heard complaints, paid for supplies out of her own war coffers. She rewarded cities that had stayed loyal and offered clemency, carefully, cautiously, to those who repented. By the time she reached the royal court, her return had already become a legend. Scribes rushed to record her tale. Artists argued over how to capture her, wild-haired and battle-worn, or radiant and reborn. Ministers whispered about the implications, a woman commanding armies, keeping oaths, and now standing at the heart of Pathine power, with the loyalty of half the provinces in her hand. And here was the dilemma. What do you do with a princess who is more popular than most kings? Some urged she be married off, as if that would contain her influence. Others wanted her placed in charge of border defenses, permanently. But Radagon didn't seem concerned with titles or politics. She had proven what she needed to. The battlefield had been her throne, the dust her crown, and her name, already etched in the hearts of soldiers and citizens alike, needed no royal inscription to endure. She didn't need a coronation. She had already been crowned, not with gold, but with history. In the months that followed her campaign, Radagon didn't seek the spotlight, but the spotlight found her anyway. She became woven into poetry and sculpture, whispered in gossip and spoken of in awe, not because she demanded it, but because she had truly earned it. Every soldier who marched beneath her banner returned with a story. Every story made her larger than life, more enduring, more untouchable. Yet within the shadowed palace halls of Pathea, where politics slithered like vipers behind silk curtains, her quietness unsettled many. She did not boast. She did not lobby. She made no grand pleas for titles or lands. Instead, she watched. She listened. She understood. Because the true battlefield had moved from the clang of swords to the hush of whispered conversations. Even the king, her father, or perhaps her brother, depending on which twist of the tangled Patheon dynasty one believed at the time, moved cautiously around her. Radagon was not merely popular, she was respected in a way few men at court could match. Not for her beauty nor her bloodline, but for her unyielding leadership, for the sheer force of her command. She had transformed her oath into law, her struggles into legend. And yet, the silence she maintained was as deliberate as any battlefield strategy. She revealed no plans because perhaps even she did not know what lay ahead. For the first time in years, she was not fighting, not commanding troops, not outmaneuvering enemies. She was still. And that stillness unnerved many. What does a woman who has conquered without a crown do next? Some historians believe Radagon wielded her silence as a weapon. Her mere presence, each subtle nod, every glance, shaped decisions. Officials hesitated to propose flawed policies, fearing her disapproval. Generals postponed campaigns, hoping for her counsel. Her silence was never passive. It was a power all its own. And so she remained a living legend. Gliding through palace corridors, her freshly braided hair threaded not just with gold, but with memory. Her very existence challenged every expectation, showing that Pathion's might was not bound to masculine hands alone. That power could ride into battle with tangled hair and return with cities bowed at its feet. And now all she needed was patience. For sometimes the greatest move is to make no move at all. As years passed, Radagon's name slowly vanished from the official records, Pathion's scribes eager to praise kings instead. Dynasties preferred obedient queens to rebellious warrior princesses, so her campaign was quietly diminished. The silence she once wielded as a weapon became the reason for her erasure. No grand mausoleum was raised in her honor. No epic poem commissioned by the state bore her likeness on gilded scrolls. Her story, once thunderous and vivid, faded into the shadows, a whisper among many, lost to time but never truly forgotten. But that's the thing about true legend. It doesn't need permission to survive. In the outposts where her army had marched, in the villages she spared, her name remained a whispered spell. Mothers told stories of her to their daughters, not as a fairy tale, but as a warning to any man who underestimated a woman with a mission. Soldiers recited her tactics as if they were sacred texts. And rebels, even decades later, still spoke of her as if she might ride again from the dust, hair flying like war banners. There's something profoundly unsettling about someone who breaks every rule of their time and still wins. Radagon wasn't content to be decoration in a court. She didn't play the flute, paint birds, or practice the refined art of being quietly ignored. She burned through her time like a comet, and then vanished just as quickly. Historians have debated what became of her. Some believe she retired from public life, choosing peace over politics. Others think she remained an advisor in the shadows, shaping Pathion's strategy from behind the veil of anonymity. A few romantics claim she rode out one final time to settle a border dispute and disappeared into legend, never confided. But what's certain is this: her legacy endured where it mattered most, in the people. She may not have worn the crown, but she ruled in ways no diadem ever could. She redefined what loyalty meant. She showed that a vow, even one as strange as refusing to comb your hair, could be as binding as a royal decree, and far more inspiring. Though history books may offer her only a footnote, the dust of Parthia still remembers her. Because you don't need a marble statue to be eternal. You just need to keep your vow and win. Centuries after her death, Radagon's story remains a paradox. Well known in whispers yet elusive in ink, no towering statue bears her likeness. No royal tomb sings her praises in carved stone. But in the collective memory of those who admire rebellion, endurance, and principled ferocity, she is immortal. Not in the way kings are remembered, but in the way forces of nature are. She didn't need to conquer foreign lands or sign monumental treaties. What she conquered was expectation. In a world where women were told to wait behind curtains while men spilled blood in their name, Radagon tore the curtain down and marched out, barefoot, helmet in hand. She didn't ask for command. She took it. And the empire didn't collapse. It followed. More importantly, she taught her people a lesson that no decree could enforce. That loyalty doesn't come from fear. It comes from seeing your leaders suffer beside you, from watching them choose discipline over comfort, from watching them keep a vow longer than anyone thought possible. She wasn't perfect. No legend is. But her story endures precisely because it wasn't polished or clean. It was tangled, muddy, honest, like her hair on that final day of victory. In that filth, there was dignity. In that vow, a vision of leadership stronger than any title. When her soldiers looked at her, they didn't see a princess. They saw someone who believed in the fight more than her own vanity. And that's the part history couldn't quite erase. Even now, long after Parthia has crumbled and its cities turn to sand, her name returns in moments of resistance. Artists revive her, writers search for her footprints, a vow not to wash until victory. It sounds absurd to some, but to those who've had to claw their way through injustice, it makes perfect sense. Tamiris was never about glamour, she was about grit, and in the end, it was the dust that crowned her, not gold. Dust, the same substance emperors tried to escape in death, yet the very thing she wore like a badge of honor. She was forgotten by kings, ignored by chroniclers, but remembered by the dust. And that's where legends truly live, not in stone, but in soil. Before empires clashed and blood soaked the sand, before kings trembled at her name, Tamiris was simply a daughter of the wind. Born to the raw, open steppe, the land she came from was not gilded in marble or echoing with philosophy. It was brutal, free, and endlessly vast. This was the world of the Massagetes, fierce, nomadic horse archers who rode like spirits of the plains, their lives shaped by survival, honor, and war. We know little of Tamiris's childhood, but we can imagine the rhythm of it. She would have learned to ride before she could run, to shoot before she could speak in full sentences. Among the Massagetes, girls were not caged in tents or veiled by silence. They trained beside the boys, rode with the warriors, and grew up with iron in their blood. To lead, one had to bleed. And Tamiris, even as a young woman, bled for her people. Her tribe worshipped the sun and sky, lived off their herds, and buried their dead with weapons ready for battle in the afterlife. They had no cities, no golden temples, but they had pride, and when enemies approached, they met them not with prayers, but with arrows. Tamiris likely came to power after the death of her husband, who may have ruled the tribe before her. But what's certain is that when the moment came, she didn't inherit leadership, she seized it. In an age when most women were nothing more than property, Tamiris stood apart, commanding armies, negotiating with kings, and speaking boldly as an equal. If those kings refused to listen, she made sure they paid the price. She was not merely a queen, she was Shahut, the steppe's living checkmate. A war chieftain clad in bronze and leather, fierce and unyielding, destined to confront the mightiest empire the world had ever seen. But power, especially power wielded by a woman, never comes without a price. As Tamiris strengthened her hold over the steppes, whispers echoed through the southern mountains. A king watched from afar. His name was Cyrus the Great, and his hunger knew no bounds. The stage was set. The wind of the steppe howled like a warning. Tamiris, daughter of warriors, was riding toward legend. While Tamiris ruled the boundless grasslands, far to the south a different force rose. Structured, imperial, relentless. Cyrus the Great, founder of the Achaemenid Empire, had already conquered Lydia in the west and Babylon in the south. His banners fluttered over deserts, mountains, and cities where languages shifted with every few days' ride. But Cyrus was far from finished. He was a builder of empires, and every builder eventually gazes beyond their borders. To Cyrus, the Massagetes were both threat and opportunity. They possessed no gold or gleaming cities, but they controlled the northeastern frontier, gateway to vital lands, resources, and trade routes. More importantly, they held something no empire could ignore: unyielding pride. In Cyrus's eyes, pride could be bent or broken. Yet brute force was not always his first move. He was known for cunning, diplomacy, and strategic deception. So he chose another path, one trodden by kings before him, seeking to dissolve enemies without bloodshed: marriage. According to ancient historians like Herodotus, Cyrus sent envoys to Tamiris proposing alliance through matrimony. On paper, it was a royal match, the mighty Persian king and the warrior queen of the Massagetes. But Tamiris was no fool. She saw the proposal for what it truly was: not love or partnership, but a calculated ploy to absorb her people without a fight. She refused. That refusal echoed through the halls of Pasargadae like a challenge. With diplomacy shattered, Cyrus spoke the language he knew best: war. He ordered his forces to cross the Araxes River, the natural boundary between Persia and the Massagetes lands. He intended to seize what Tamiris would not surrender. But Tamiris was ready. She knew her land intimately. She understood her people's fierce, swift cavalry tactics. Most of all, she knew Cyrus was not coming merely for territory. He was coming to crush the woman who dared say no. The world's most powerful king had declared war, but he had no idea what kind of fury he had just awakened on the steppe. Cyrus the Great, master strategist and seasoned conqueror, believed he could outwit her. He had faced kings, crushed cities, and subdued nations. To him, the Massagetes were little more than wild nomads with fast horses and no cities to defend. He didn't realize he was stepping into the path of someone just as cunning and far more furious. Tamiris had warned him. After rejecting his marriage offer, she sent a clear message: cross the Araxes River and you will regret it. But Cyrus crossed anyway, building a bridge of boats to carry his army into Massagete land. Instead of striking immediately, Tamiris pulled her forces back, luring Cyrus deeper into unfamiliar terrain. The Persians found an abandoned camp well stocked with food and, more importantly, wine, a luxury the nomadic Massagetes rarely indulged in. It was a baited trap, and Cyrus took it, perhaps thinking the enemy had panicked and fled. Inside the camp, he left a portion of his army under the command of General Harpagus, a trusted officer. As the Massagetes returned under the cover of night, they fell upon the drunk and unsuspecting Persians with deadly precision. The battle was brutal and swift. Among the dead was Spargapises, Tomiris' son and a Massagete commander. Accounts differ on what happened next. Some say Spargapises was taken alive and, realizing his capture, begged for death and took his own life. Others claim he was killed in the fighting. But all agree, when news reached Tomiris, something inside her shattered and then turned to steel. Her grief was volcanic, but her rage, that became legendary. She sent another message to Cyrus. This one wasn't a warning. It was a vow. "You may be a glutton for blood," she said, "but I swear I will give you your fill." She promised to make the ground run red with Persian blood. Her vengeance would not be quiet. Cyrus had taken her son. He had violated her land. Now he would meet not the queen of the Massagetae, but the mother of a slain warrior, and the last face he would ever see. The next battle would not be a skirmish. It would be an execution. The sun rose over the plains like a blade, sharp and blinding. Tomiris stood at the head of her army, no longer just a queen, but a storm given form. Her warriors, hardened by the nomadic life, painted their faces with ash and rage. This wasn't about politics anymore. This was about blood. Cyrus, for all his might, had underestimated the Massagetae. He assumed they would fight like the tribes he had conquered before, chaotic, uncoordinated, easy to crush. But Tomiris had spent her life among warriors. She understood how to strike, not blindly, but with precision. She rallied her forces for a full-scale assault on the Persian invaders. And this time, she wasn't holding back. The location of the final battle is lost to history, swallowed by the vastness of the steppe. But what's clear is that Tomiris launched a ferocious counterattack. Her cavalry swept across the plains like a tide of knives. They fired arrows from horseback, closed in with axes, and fought like people with nothing left to lose. The Persians, battle-hardened, disciplined, experienced, weren't expecting this level of organized fury. Tomiris didn't just lead her troops, she fought beside them. Her presence on the battlefield ignited her warriors like wildfire. Every strike was driven by vengeance. Every charge was an answer to her son's death. Cyrus tried to hold the line, but it shattered. The Persians were routed. Many died where they stood. Others fled into the endless grasslands, only to be hunted down. And Cyrus the Great, the man who had conquered Babylon, Lydia, and nearly the known world, fell in the chaos. Whether he was slain in combat or captured and executed depends on the version told. But either way, he died on Tomiris' terms. What came next is infamous. According to Herodotus, Tomiris found Cyrus's body on the battlefield, ordered his head severed, and then, in a final act of symbolic revenge, submerged it in a wineskin filled with human blood. "Drink your fill," she said, "of the blood you thirsted for." Was it historical fact or poetic embellishment? Maybe both. But it didn't matter. The message was eternal. Tomiris was not to be conquered. When the dust settled and the grass drank deep the blood of empire, Tomiris stood victorious, a warrior queen who had done what no king or army before her could. She brought Cyrus the Great to his end. News of the defeat sent shockwaves across the ancient world. The mighty Achaemenid Empire, long believed unstoppable, had been humiliated by a woman from the steppes. The Persians scrambled to downplay the loss, but the death of their founder could not be ignored. Cyrus's body was eventually returned and buried with honor in the royal tomb at Pasargadae. Yet the stain of his final defeat lingered, a wound etched deep into the empire's legacy. For Tomius and the Magedae, however, the victory was far more than mere revenge. It was a bold declaration. They had defended their sovereignty not only with weapons, but with dignity. Tamius had stood up to the world's most powerful ruler, and she hadn't merely survived, she had triumphed. Then, as suddenly as she had appeared, she vanished from history. No records survived detailing her later years, her death, or any successors she may have appointed. It was as if, after exacting her vengeance, Tamius simply rode into the horizon and let the winds carry her legend forward. In the centuries that followed, historians, poets, and chroniclers struggled to fill in the blanks. transforming her into a symbol as much as a woman. To the Persians, her name was a bitter reminder. To the Greeks, she was a paradox, a barbarian who displayed greater nobility than many kings. And to the peoples of Central Asia, Tamias became folklore, a ghostly queen who rides fiercely across the steppe. Unyielding, with a sword that remembers, her legacy inspired countless portrayals across cultures. Medieval manuscripts depicted her in regal armor, Renaissance paintings imagined her towering over Cyrus's corpse. In every era, she became what people needed: a mother, an avenger, a wild queen, a lesson in hubris, or a symbol of feminine power. But one truth cuts through the myth. She changed history. Tamias didn't inherit a throne. She forged it in fire and fury. And for one brief, unforgettable moment, the Steppe Queen proved that not all empires rise. Some fall beneath the hooves of warriors riding with vengeance in their hearts. Much of what we know about Tamias comes not from the Massagetes themselves. They left no stone tablets or royal archives, but from the pen of a Greek, Herodotus, often called the father of history. Writing a century after her time, he immortalized Tamias in his histories, casting her as a warrior queen of astonishing resolve and terrifying vengeance. But Herodotus wasn't simply reporting facts. He was weaving a story, one part chronicle, one part morality tale. To him and his Greek audience, Tamias represented the ultimate reversal of imperial arrogance. Cyrus the Great, a man who had conquered half the known world, fell not to a vast army or a rival king, but to a woman who fought not for glory, but for her child. Her victory was almost mythic, and Herodotus treated it as such. He even detailed her grisly revenge, the wineskin of blood, the severed head of Cyrus, and her damning words, "Drink your fill." But was it true? Modern historians debate this endlessly. Some argue that Herodotus exaggerated or even invented parts of the tale, using Tamias as a narrative tool to humble the Persian Empire, which at the time of his writing was still a looming force over the Greek world. Others believe that while the blood wineskin episode might be symbolic, the core event, Cyrus's death at the hands of Tamias, likely did happen. There's also the question of bias. Herodotus, for all his insight, often filtered foreign cultures through a Greek lens. He portrayed the Massagetes as wild and free, yet noble, an exotic mirror to Greek ideals of honor and liberty. Tamias, in that frame, wasn't just a barbarian. She was a moral counterweight to Persian ambition. Still, even if the details blurred over time, Herodotus succeeded in one thing. He ensured Tamias would not be forgotten. Because of him, she became more than a historical footnote. She entered the realm of legend, where facts soften, but impact sharpens. And in that space between myth and memory, Tamias' story found a strange kind of immortality. In a world dominated by kings and conquerors, Herodotus left us a queen who refused to kneel and left her enemies bleeding in the sand. Though she may have slain one of the ancient world's most iconic emperors, Tamias never ruled an empire herself. She didn't build cities of stone or inscribe edicts on golden tablets. Her people, the Massagetes, were nomads, living not by walls but by the rhythms of the land, the sky, and the horse. This meant that Tamias' legacy was never institutionalized. There were no marble busts or royal coins bearing her likeness, no archives to immortalize her decrees. Instead, her story passed on, as stories do, on the steppe, through firelight and song. And in the whispered age of warriors, the Massagetes were one of many powerful tribes of the Central Asian steppes. Their cousins included the Sayans, the Saka, and the Dahai, all expert horse archers who roamed the lands between the Caspian Sea and the borders of ancient China. These tribes were feared by empires for their mobility, unpredictability, and ferocity in battle. Tamias, as a female leader among them, was rare, but not entirely unique. Steppe culture, unlike many sedentary civilizations, allowed women far greater freedoms. Women rode, hunted, fought, and even led. Among the Scythians, archaeologists have found graves of female warriors buried with weapons, armor, and horse gear, confirming that the stories of fierce steppe queens were more than just legend. Tamias stood at the pinnacle of that tradition. Her power didn't come from inheritance or religion. It came from respect, grit, and sheer capability. She was a unifying force among scattered clans, a political leader and a military commander in a landscape where survival meant riding faster, shooting better, and fearing nothing. But because the Massagetes left no monuments, Tamias became a kind of phantom queen. her name echoing only in the writings of outsiders and in the oral traditions of the steppe. To the Persian scribes, she was a warning, to the Greeks, a marvel, and to her own people, likely a memory. Carried in bloodlines and battle songs, a ghost who rode with them across the plains. Empires may rise and fall in stone, but the stories of the steppe live on in the wind, and Tamiris, fierce, grieving, and unbroken, became its voice. Centuries passed, and the empires that once surrounded the Massagetæ rose and crumbled. Cyrus's successors built Persepolis, fought Alexander the Great, and faded into the dusty footnotes of time. But to her, the legend endured. Not in the palaces of kings, but in the hearts of those who refused to bow. Across Central Asia, she became more than a queen. She became a symbol of female strength, of resistance, of the untamed spirit of the steppe. In many ways, Tamiris embodied a kind of defiance that transcended geography. She was not Roman, not Greek, not Persian, and so her story belonged to no empire. That made her both dangerous and inspiring. In the medieval Islamic world, chroniclers occasionally mentioned her name, reshaped by language but never quite forgotten. In some versions, she was praised for her justice and vengeance. In others, she was seen as a savage queen, a reminder that power in the hands of a woman could be both glorious and terrifying. By the time the Renaissance rolled around, European artists rediscovered her tale through the writings of Herodotus. Painters depicted her in elaborate armor, standing triumphantly over Cyrus's lifeless body. In one dramatic painting, she holds his severed head aloft like a trophy, blood-soaked and victorious. It was theatrical, yes, but also political. These artists were fascinated by the idea of a woman who didn't just survive in a man's world, she won. In the 19th and 20th centuries, Tamiris became a nationalist icon in regions like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan. Poets and educators reclaimed her as a historical heroine, proof that the roots of Central Asian identity were fierce, proud, and deeply feminine. Her name appeared in textbooks, statues, and even military ceremonies. A woman who had once ruled on horseback with a bow in hand was now riding once more, through memory and myth, through rebellion. And pride. In a world that still wrestles with the idea of powerful women, Tamiris remains a challenge. She wasn't perfect, saintly, or tame. She was decisive, brutal when necessary, compassionate only to those who deserved it. She was resistance in human form, and the blood of empire on her hands was a crown she wore without apology. History tends to favor the builders of monuments, the writers of laws, the kings who carved their names into stone. Tamiris did none of these. She left no empire behind, no palace to excavate, no royal seal to decipher, and yet her name still lives. Not because she ruled forever, but because she refused to be erased. She stands as a contradiction to how history often remembers women, not as helpmates or footnotes, but as forces of destiny. Tamiris didn't beg for recognition. She took it with blood and fire. She didn't ride behind a king. She rode against one and won. Her story is retold in classrooms from Central Asia to Europe, not simply because she killed Cyrus the Great, but because she dared to defy him. She wasn't defending an empire. She was defending freedom, a freedom that rode on the backs of horses, that hunted with hawks, that slept under the stars, a freedom that could not be neatly drawn on a map. Today, her statues rise from Kazakhstan's capital cities, and her face adorns coins and textbooks. To modern Central Asians, she is a mother of nations, a link to a pre-Islamic, pre-Soviet, proudly nomadic past, a reminder that their identity wasn't born in submission, but in the cry of battle and the gallop of horses. In a world still fractured by power, by gender, by the fragile threads of memory, Tamiris stands as a blazing beacon, not merely because she slew a great king, but because she imparted a truth far greater. Dignity is not granted, it is claimed. Sometimes leadership looks like a mother mourning her son, yet refusing to let the slayer escape unpunished. We often ask ourselves why some names echo through eternity while others fade into silence. Tamiris endured because she was unforgettable. Because in an age when women were expected to vanish behind the tents of men, she rose, sword in hand, fire in her heart, and carved her story deep into the flesh of history. Empires crumble, statues shatter, but legends ride on. And somewhere carrying the whispering winds across the vast steppe, a queen still gallops, unbroken, undefeated, utterly eternal. In ancient Egypt, beekeeping was never a mere pastime. It was a sacred, state-endorsed science blessed by the gods themselves. Long before modern apiaries buzzed to life, the Egyptians had crafted an intricate, mobile system for managing bees and harvesting honey. By 2400 BCE, vivid depictions of beekeeping adorned the sunlit tomb walls of Saqqara's necropolises. It wasn't just about sweet harvests. It was a ritual woven through agriculture, medicine, faith, and the journey beyond death. Their hives were horizontal clay tubes stacked in rows and laid on their sides, more like terracotta drain pipes than the wooden boxes we know today. These hives were designed with purpose and care, moved seasonally as the Nile's floodwaters receded and blossoms flourished along its banks. Following the nectar flow, these ancient beekeepers practiced transhumance, an early GPS guiding their hives through the rhythms of nature. Smoke was gently blown through clay or stone pipes to calm the bees before the harvest. Without the protection of modern suits, these keepers relied on timing, wisdom, and a fearless heart. Honeycombs were handled with care, and the golden honey gathered not only nourishment but for healing, mummification, and sacred ceremonies. Honey was a divine gift associated with Ra, the sun god himself. Legend said bees sprang from Ra's tears as they touched the earth. This was no mere myth. It shaped a profound respect. Bees were messengers between the mortal and the divine. Their honey found its way into temple offerings, funerary rites, and even as a form of currency. And in medicine, honey was treasured. Ancient papyri catalog over 500 remedies featuring honey mixed with herbs, wine, or milk, used to heal wounds, fight infections, and soothe digestive ailments. Its antibacterial properties were known, even if the science wasn't. Beeswax, too, was harvested and used in cosmetics, embalming, and even writing tablets. It had value beyond the hive, becoming part of daily life for scribes, priests, and healers alike. In Egypt, the hive wasn't just a source of sweetness. It was a symbol of balance, healing, and celestial order, carefully cultivated under the watchful eyes of both humans and gods. While Egypt gave beekeeping structure and sanctity, ancient Mesopotamia gave it something equally vital: laws. The cradle of civilization didn't just master irrigation, writing, and city building. They also understood the value of honey and the importance of protecting its production. Though Mesopotamian beekeeping wasn't as visually celebrated as in Egyptian tombs, its traces are found in cuneiform tablets and legal codes, suggesting a quietly sophisticated practice. References to bees and honey appear as early as the Sumerian period. In Akkadian and Babylonian texts, there are mentions of nins, meaning bee gardens or apiaries. These spaces were often attached to temple grounds or royal estates, suggesting honey production was an elite-controlled resource. Honey and beeswax were used in religious offerings, medicine, food, and trade, and losing a hive could be a serious economic blow. The most telling piece of evidence comes from the Code of Hammurabi, dating to around 1754 BCE. While most of the code is famously devoted to issues like theft, injury, and agriculture, a few lines directly address bee disputes. If someone allowed their bees to swarm into another man's field, and if the bees caused damage, they were liable. If honey was stolen, restitution had to be made, sometimes in the form of silver or replacement jars. In a world where almost everything was counted in grain, the fact that honey warranted its own legal protection speaks volumes. Mesopotamians also understood bees as more than just insects. Some texts describe them as divine messengers, even linking them to Ninurta, the god of agriculture and war. Beeswax, in particular, was valued for sealing documents and creating ritual figurines. It was both practical and mystical, part of both bureaucracy and magic. Though the exact design of Mesopotamian hives isn't fully preserved, scholars believe they may have used mud brick or woven basket hives, similar to early Levantine styles. These would have been kept in shaded gardens or on rooftops, protected from the harsh summer heat. Mesopotamian beekeeping was less about worship and more about structure, regulating resources, ensuring fairness, and maintaining the economic balance of a society where even a bee sting might end in litigation. Here, the hive was not just a biological wonder, it was a microcosm of order, law, and the civilizing impulse itself. In the rugged highlands of Anatolia, long before the Greeks took center stage, the Hittites were quietly mastering the art of beekeeping. And they weren't treating it like a backyard hobby. To the Hittites, bees were sacred agents of purity, messengers between realms, and essential to both agriculture and the spiritual health of the kingdom. Unlike Egypt and Mesopotamia, where beekeeping was a blend of science and economics, the Hittites took a more ritualistic approach. In religious texts from the 14th and 13th centuries BCE, bees are mentioned not just as producers of honey, but as active participants in purification rites. One famous Hittite ritual text describes a ceremony in which a bee is summoned to go and remove the evil, the impurity, and the wrath of the gods. The bee is then released, not killed, a rare show of mercy in ancient rites, suggesting a deep reverence for the insect. The Hittites valued honey for its taste and its sacred utility. It was used in libations, sacrificial offerings, and anointing rituals, often combined with wine, milk, or grain. Honey wasn't just consumed, it was poured, burned, and blessed. It served as a medium between human intention and divine reception. In terms of practice, evidence suggests the Hittites used clay or woven hives, likely stored in protected enclosures near temples or royal estates. Though the archaeological record is sparse, parallels with neighboring Levantine and Syrian traditions hint at portable tube-like hives, possibly made from straw and mud, stacked and managed much like those in Egypt. Beekeepers in the Hittite world likely operated under temple control, their work deeply embedded in seasonal festivals and state rituals. Honey was not a mere commodity. It was a tool of diplomacy, healing, and spiritual cleansing. The bee, small and unassuming, held symbolic weight that far exceeded its size. The Hittites also contributed a vital piece to the global understanding of bees. They recognized bee migration. Some ancient texts reveal the seasonal rhythms of bee swarms, linking the blooming of flowers with the flow of honey, a testament to how closely early peoples observed their natural world. In Anatolia, the gentle hum of the hive was no mere background noise. It was a sacred vibration, echoing through the bones of gods and kings alike. The ancient Greeks did more than study bees. They revered them. They feared their power and marveled at their order. For the Greeks, the hive was more than a source of honey. It was a living metaphor, a blueprint for the ideal city-state, a symbol of divine harmony and a wellspring of scientific wonder. Greek beekeepers elevated the art and science of apiculture with a blend of practical skill and philosophical insight. Unlike earlier civilizations that used fixed clay hives, the Greeks innovated with movable terracotta hives, featuring removable lids and sections. This design allowed beekeepers to harvest honey without destroying the colony, an early step toward sustainability. They also mastered smoke control, using ceramic bellows and clay smokers to gently sedate bees before honey extraction. This technique reduced stings and preserved hive structure, enabling multiple harvests each season. Aristotle, one of history's greatest minds, studied bees with remarkable attention to detail. In his Historia Animalium, he described the social roles within the hive: workers gathering nectar, guards defending, and a leader he called the king bee. Though he misidentified the leader's gender, his observations laid the foundation for centuries of entomological study. Honey held a sacred place in Greek culture, sweetening wine, preserving fruits, and flavoring cakes. It was also a base for medicinal salves, especially in treating wounds, and was regarded as a divine gift. The Greeks believed ambrosia, the food of the gods, was a mixture of honey and wine. The bee carried deep mythological significance. Linked to Artemis, goddess of the wild, and Data, goddess of the harvest, bees symbolized sacred feminine power. Priestesses of Artemis were called Melissa, the Greek word for bees. To the Greeks, the hive was both a marvel of nature and a spiritual emblem, a reminder that even the smallest creatures act with purpose, discipline, and grace. In their study of bees, they believed they were unlocking the very laws of nature, and perhaps the will of the gods themselves. If the Greeks studied bees with wonder, the Romans managed them with ambition. Beekeeping in the Roman Empire wasn't just a cottage industry. It was scaled to match the needs of a civilization that stretched across continents. From the vineyards of Gaul to the hills of Hispania, Rome turned the humble hive into an empire-wide enterprise. The Romans inherited much of their apicultural knowledge from the Greeks and Etruscans, but they expanded it into a formalized agricultural science. Writers like Varro and Columella recorded detailed instructions for building hives, harvesting honey, and relocating colonies. Their treatises describe beekeeping with a startling modernity, including observations on swarm behavior, seasonal cycles, and pest control. Roman hives came in many forms: hollow logs, cork bark containers, clay tubes, and even woven baskets sealed with dung or mud. Flexibility was key. In colder climates, more insulation was needed. In warmer provinces, ventilation was critical. These innovations allowed Rome's beekeepers to adapt the craft across vastly different regions of the empire. To calm bees, Romans employed clay pots filled with smoldering herbs like thyme or oregano. The smoke soothed the hive and perhaps added a subtle flavor to the honey. Harvesting was done with iron knives, and wax was separated by melting and straining. That wax was later used in candles, writing tablets, cosmetics, and even waterproofing ships. Honey wasn't just food, it was everywhere. It was added to wine to make mulsum, used in baking and sauces for meat and fish, and even as an early energy source for athletes and soldiers. Roman physicians, following Hippocratic traditions, prescribed honey for sore throats, wounds, fevers, and digestive problems. Its antibacterial properties were well known and well used, but perhaps the most Roman thing about their beekeeping was organization. Large villas often had dedicated honey farms run by enslaved labor under the supervision of estate managers. Production was recorded in ledgers, and surplus honey was sold in markets or exported to distant provinces. Bees were viewed not just as insects, but as productive citizens of the Roman economy. To the Romans, a well-run hive mirrored a well-run household, ordered, obedient, and endlessly fruitful, while ancient civilizations cultivated bees for honey and wax. Many also saw the hive as a doorway to the divine. Across Egypt, Greece, Mesopotamia, and beyond, bees weren't just insects. They were spiritual beings buzzing between worlds, delivering messages from the gods and offering sacred gifts like honey that bridged the natural and supernatural realms. In Egypt, bees were directly tied to divine creation. As mentioned earlier, mythology claimed that Ra, the sun god, shed tears that turned into bees upon touching the earth. Honey was used in temple offerings to please deities and to accompany the dead into the afterlife. The bee also became a royal symbol. Pharaohs of Lower Egypt bore the title He of the sedge and the bee, connecting their authority to the cosmic harmony of the hive. In Greece, the bee held powerful feminine symbolism. The priestesses of Demeter and Artemis, goddesses of fertility and wilderness, were called Melissa, or bees. These women were considered channels between the divine and mortal realms. The Oracle of Delphi, one of the most important religious centers in the ancient world, was believed by some to have originally been presided over by bee priestesses. Even the famed Pythia, the Delphic prophetess, was sometimes called the Delphic bee. The hive itself was often seen as a microcosm of perfect order, disciplined, selfless, and productive. Philosophers and mystics compared bee society to the ideal human society, cooperative, industrious, and reverent. The Stoics admired bees for their instinctive sense of duty. Early Christians would later adopt the bee as a symbol of chastity and resurrection, noting how bees create but do not lust. In the magical traditions of Mesopotamia, bees were invoked in ritual purification. In some Hittite ceremonies, a live bee was released after absorbing the impurities of the community, literally carrying sin away on its tiny wings. Honey and wax were burned in sacred fires, used in crafting protective amulets, and embedded in magical texts for blessings and healing. The bee was more than a metaphor. It was a bridge, a creature that lived in nature's hidden spaces, made golden food without killing, and stung only in defense. To ancient peoples, bees weren't just miraculous, they were mystical. To the ancient world, honey wasn't just delicious, it was divine medicine. Long before bacteria were discovered, people instinctively knew that honey could clean wounds, soothe coughs, and preserve the body. It wasn't magic, though it often felt like it. It was chemistry, centuries ahead of its formal explanation. In Egypt, honey was a cornerstone of ancient medicine. Medical papyri like the Ebers Papyrus, circa 1550 BCE, listed honey in over 500 prescriptions. It was mixed with milk, figs, garlic, and herbs to treat everything from eye infections to digestive problems. When paired with animal fat or resin, it was applied as a salve to burns and cuts. Doctors knew that wounds treated with honey healed faster and resisted infection, likely due to honey's natural acidity and hydrogen peroxide content. The Greeks followed suit. Hippocrates, the father of modern medicine, prescribed honey for respiratory problems and ulcers. And for fatigue, he used honey mixed with vinegar to create oxymel, a tonic used to clear phlegm and reduce fevers. Greek athletes drank honeyed water to boost stamina during Olympic training, believing it restored strength faster than wine or water alone. In India, the Ayurvedic system held honey, madhu, in high regard. It was classified by taste, source, and medicinal potency. Ayurvedic texts warned against overheating honey, but endorsed it as a treatment for indigestion, colds, wounds, and even poison. It was also used in religious rituals, offered to gods and consumed during sacred fasts for both spiritual and bodily cleansing. The Romans, too, believed in the medicinal power of honey. Pliny the Elder recorded dozens of remedies involving honey in his natural history. It was used as a base for ointments, gargles, and laxatives, and even to treat the wounded after battle. Honey mixed with poppy juice was given as a sedative. Roman surgeons kept it on hand to dress wounds and reduce inflammation. Beeswax had its place in medicine too, as a base for plasters, balms, and even dental fillings. Its malleability and resistance to decay made it ideal for sealing and preserving. In short, honey in the ancient world wasn't just sweet, it was life-saving. It healed the sick, preserved the dead, and symbolized purity. It was the pharmacy of the gods, delivered by the wings of bees. Ancient beekeepers were more than farmers. They were innovators, engineers, and keen observers of nature. Across civilizations, they developed specialized tools and methods that allowed them to manage bee colonies effectively, harvest honey sustainably, and even protect themselves from the bees' defensive stings. One of the most important innovations was the design of the hive itself. The Egyptians popularized the use of horizontal cylindrical clay hives, essentially large terracotta tubes stacked in rows. These hives were durable, portable, and mimicked the natural cavities where bees thrived. Similarly, the Greeks and Romans used terracotta and woven basket hives, some with removable lids to allow access to honeycombs without destroying the colony. The ability to inspect and harvest honey without killing the bees was revolutionary, paving the way for modern, sustainable beekeeping. To safely extract honey, ancient beekeepers used smoke to calm the bees. The Greeks invented clay smokers and bellows designed to direct smoke into the hive's entrance. The smoke masked alarm pheromones released by guard bees, reducing their aggression. The Romans refined this by burning fragrant herbs like thyme or oregano, which soothed the bees, and possibly even added subtle flavors to the honey. Harvesting tools varied. Wooden or bronze knives were used to slice honeycombs carefully. Sometimes combs were pressed to extract liquid honey, and the leftover wax was melted and filtered for later use. Beekeepers often wore minimal protection, relying on skill, timing, and calm movements to avoid stings. Suits and gloves were still millennia away. Ancient texts reveal that beekeepers also observed bee behavior very closely. They understood swarm cycles, seasonal patterns, and the importance of moving hives to optimize nectar collection. Some cultures practiced transhumance, relocating hives to follow blooming plants, similar to modern migratory beekeeping. Additionally, honey storage was a vital part of the process. Egyptians used sealed ceramic jars to protect honey from moisture and spoilage. Honey's remarkable shelf life was well known. Some sealed jars found in tombs have lasted for centuries. Even the relationship between humans and bees was carefully managed. Rituals were performed to appease bee spirits or gods, ensuring their cooperation and avoiding misfortune. This spiritual care was just as vital as the physical tools in maintaining a productive hive. In all, ancient beekeeping was a blend of craftsmanship, natural science, and reverence. The tools and techniques they developed laid the foundation that still influences modern apiculture today. The ancient practice of beekeeping created a lasting relationship between humans and bees, one that continues to this day. Far from being just a simple agricultural activity, early beekeeping was both an art and a science. It influenced medicine, religion, economy, and ecology across civilizations, shaping the way we understand nature and sustainability. From the Nile Valley to the hills of Anatolia, from the temples of Greece to the farms of Rome, ancient beekeepers honed methods to protect and sustain their colonies. Their innovations in hive design, use of smoke, and seasonal management allowed for sustainable honey harvests, a practice crucial for both survival and trade. The respect they showed for the bees' life cycles helped foster a model of harmony between humans and nature. Their understanding of honey as a medicine informed the early pharmacopoeias of Egypt, India, and Rome, influencing healing practices that still persist in traditional medicine worldwide. Honey's antibacterial and preservative properties became the foundation for wound care and natural remedies, while beeswax shaped early technologies in cosmetics, art, and construction. The symbolic and the spiritual meanings attributed to bees and honey in ancient cultures still endure. Religious rituals honoring bees and honey continue in various traditions, reflecting humanity's ongoing fascination with the hive as a metaphor for order, cooperation, and divine blessing. The idea of bees as messengers between worlds or symbols of resurrection permeates art, literature, and folklore across centuries. Moreover, the ancient practice of migratory beekeeping, moving hives to follow floral blooms, is echoed in modern commercial agriculture, essential for crop pollination and global food production. The innovations of ancient beekeepers help set the stage for today's awareness of bees as vital pollinators and the environmental challenges they face. Despite technological advances, the core relationship remains unchanged. Humans depend on bees for food, medicine, and ecosystem health. And bees, in turn, have shaped human culture, economy, and spirituality since the dawn of civilization. The legacy of ancient beekeeping is a testament to human ingenuity, respect for nature, and the enduring power of collaboration, both within the hive and between species. It reminds us that even the smallest creatures can inspire science, faith, and survival. So, what do you think about these incredible stories of strength, resilience, and legacy? Have they inspired you as much as they inspire us? If you enjoyed this video, please leave a comment down below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel to join us on more journeys like this. Before you go, send your warmest good night wishes to everyone watching. Let's spread kindness and positivity together. Thank you for being here with us. Sweet dreams, and see you in the next video.